Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The president is ready to move on and focus on his agenda now that his hand-picked attorney general has temporarily, at least, blown away the dark cloud of the Mueller report by issuing an extremely perfunctory letter seemingly designed to get people to believe that Trump had been fully exonerated. It did not exonerate him. He hasn't, but until we can actually see the Mueller's report, Trump has something of a window to focus on his agenda. So let's talk about that agenda. 1, take health care away from more than 20 million people and literally destroy the nation's entire health insurance infrastructure. 2, intervene to limit federal funding for the people of Puerto Rico as they try to recover from the worst disaster in the island's history. And 3, stick it to America's school children by cutting $7 billion from the education budget and eliminating all $18 million in federal funding for the Special Olympics? We're going to talk to Representative Barbara Lee, who grilled Betsy DeVos yesterday, for more on that part of the agenda in just a little bit. Now, we know Donald Trump is not exactly a policy wonk. He'd much rather sit around during executive time and live tweet Trump TV. But he has found an issue he is apparently extremely passionate about: screwing over the people of Puerto Rico. He doesn't want another single dollar going to the island. That is a senior administration official talking to the Washington Post. Trump has reportedly made up figures about how much money went to Puerto Rico to suggest the island has gotten too much recovery money. Remember, 1,000 people or more died there in the natural disaster. 3,000 at least in the deadliest hurricanes in American history. The president told Republicans that aid for Puerto Rico is way out of proportion to what Texas and Florida and others have gotten, and explicitly asked top advisors for ways to limit federal support from going to Puerto Rico. I wonder what it could be about Puerto Rico that has Trump so laser focused on denying desperately needed funding to its people. That's just one plank of the Trump cruelty agenda. There's also his decision to have his administration back a GOP lawsuit to completely eliminate Obamacare. It's a decision that has infuriated congressional Republicans who were burned over health care in the midterms. One senior GOP aide describing Trump's move as the dumbest thing I have ever heard and the equivalent of punching yourself in the face repeatedly. Trump reportedly made the decision over the objections of Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar and Attorney General William Barr, and at the urging of Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, who helped convince Trump that his base would love the move. Many Republicans most certainly do not. Here's another quote. They are completely tone deaf. How about a few more victory laps on Mueller while you can get away with it? WTF is wrong with them? At this point, Trump and Republicans have no plan to actually replace Obamacare, though Trump does have a slogan and plenty of empty promises.
We are going to be, the Republicans, the party of great health care. And if the Supreme Court rules that Obamacare is out, we will have a plan that's far better than Obamacare.
He's been promising that plan for about 3 years now. We are still waiting. Now, if the Trump-backed lawsuit succeeds and there is no replacement bill, here's coverage between the Medicaid expansion and the exchanges. Spending to fight opioid addiction will be slashed. 133 million Americans with pre-existing conditions will lose their protections in buying health insurance. 171 million would no longer have caps on the cost of expensive treatments. And the entire health insurance system, the whole thing, will be thrown into utter chaos. This is the battleground on which the 2020 election will now be fought, thanks to the president. Joining me now, one of the Democrats who wants to take Trump on in that fight, who's rolling out policy after policy as she seeks to become her party's presidential nominee, Democratic Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. Welcome to the show. Senator, let's start on the health care news. What do you make of the reporting that they tried to convince the president not to do this, including the Attorney General and the head of HHS, and he did it anyway?
Look, it's been clear from the beginning that they never intended to repeal and replace, right? All they wanted to do is just burn down the healthcare system. And I assume the principal reason is because it helps a lot of people who are not wealthy and part of the Trump energy. And so my view on this is we just got to fight them back. We have to defend health care. They have put it in front of us, and we say this is part of what Democrats are about. We defend health care. That's one of our principal core issues, and we will fight this all the way.
You know, I've followed your writing and your speaking on the subject of sort of corruption in Washington, D.C. and the sort of influence of corporate America and big industries. And I'm curious what you think of this move, because the health insurance industry does not want this. In fact, they've explicitly come out against it. They have tremendous sway on Capitol Hill. This is is something that is so destructive, so out past the bounds of what people want, even inside the industry with a lot of money, and they're still doing it. How do you make sense of that?
Well, I think you have to remember, in something like the healthcare industry, there are a lot of conflicting areas.
Yeah.
So you may be right. Some of the insurance companies don't want it. But the flip side is, shoot, a lot of the drug companies, they're fine.
Yeah.
Right? However, so long as they can just keep charging high drug prices and nobody's going after them to negotiate those prices and try to pull them down, good with the big drug companies. And there's just a bottom line ugliness about this. Take away health care from 20 million Americans and then celebrate afterwards. You watched it. I watched it. I was in the Senate. I watched the House after they passed the repeal of the Affordable Care Act and gave each other high fives. What kind of people give each other high fives over taking away health care from 20 million Americans?
Is there a way, I saw some reporting about this, obviously the Democrats don't have the majority in the Senate. It's very hard to bring things up when Mitch McConnell runs floor time there. Is there any way to legislatively get around this in terms of some sort of defunding of the DOJ's use of the lawsuit or anything like that?
Look, there'll be efforts. We'll try. We'll also try to restore funding as part of the budget negotiations. As you say, there are a lot of Republicans who don't want to be here. But ultimately, I see this as very different. I see this as the war of ideas. This is about where you think this country ought to go and what you think the 2020 election ought to be about. Donald Trump thinks what it should be about is he gets his base all stirred up and he shows how tough and manly he is by taking away health care from millions of people. I think there's another set of ideas that Democrats need to be talking about. I've proposed a wealth tax, and out of that, universal child care and cutting the student loan debt burden and building millions of new housing units and attacking racial redlining head on. Those are changes that we should be talking about with the American people. We have this incredible opportunity during a primary to talk about ideas. And if you think that ideas are important and going to be an important part of what happens to this country going forward, then look, we're coming to the end of the quarter. And I could use everyone's help on this. Go to ElizabethWarren.com. Pitch in some money, volunteer, sign up, but be part of the notion that we need to be in a war of ideas, that we need to push our ideas forward. I need help to keep putting those ideas in the debate. We need our democratic ideas to talk about, not just being the tail on the dog that Donald Trump wags.
You have a new policy proposal about antitrust and agribusiness, which I want to talk about in a second. But before I get to that, I do want to talk about Puerto Rico, because the president, this is part of the budget fight. The president has really fixated on this. All the reporting says this is the rare policy issue he's quite obsessed with. No more money for Puerto Rico. What's your response to that?
First of all, we have already allocated money to Puerto Rico that this administration has held up. And the money we've allocated to Puerto Rico is not nearly enough. So this is ugly piled on ugly. Donald Trump has done this to Puerto Rico, and it is fundamentally wrong. This is 3 million American citizens who are held hostage to a government right now that doesn't want to make sure that they get basic health care, that they have decent housing, that they have enough food for their children to eat. Donald Trump is fundamentally wrong on this, and whether you're Democrat or Republican and independent, every one of us should be pushing back. The people of Puerto Rico are part of all of us. They are American citizens. They send their sons and daughters to serve in our military in higher proportions than almost any group in the United States of America. And right now, this is an island with people who are suffering. It is our responsibility as American citizens and as human beings to step up on behalf of Puerto Rico. The entire Congress, Republican and Democrat, should push back at Donald Trump over this.
You do have a new policy today that you rolled out about agribusiness, and
Yes.
some of it takes on is sort of, I think, using antitrust tools to go after some of the largest agribusiness concerns. One of them is a specific policy that is very interesting to me, and I've read a bit about before, which is called right to repair.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is? What is a national right to repair law?
So let me just put it in the context. As you rightly said, I've been talking for a very long time about the importance of enforcing our antitrust laws. The idea is that these giant corporations begin to just take over whole markets. They wipe out competition. They squeeze everybody else's profits, and that we need a level playing field. And the way we do that is we simply enforce the antitrust laws, or places where they're incomplete, we need to add to them. So right to repair starts with this problem. A company puts out really sophisticated equipment and then says if it breaks, the only one who can repair it is you got to bring it back to the company. That means you don't get to repair it at home the way my Daddy and my 3 older brothers used to do. You don't get to take it to a shop in town where there are 3 competing places. Both of those keep costs down for small farms. Instead, you got to take it back to the one company that sold it to you, and they can charge whatever they want to charge, because as long as the thing is broken, you can't get any use out of it. So right to repair just basically says, hey, guys, you got to make the information and the parts available. You get to sell them. You can make a profit on it, but you got to make it available to everyone. So once a small farm has purchased a piece of equipment, they can either try to repair it themselves if it breaks, or they can take it to repair shops in town. It's just one more way to try to level the playing field a little bit, where a giant corporation has said, no, we're going to scoop up all the profits for ourselves.
Let me ask you, this is a question about your approach here. And you have rolled out a lot of policy on redlining, as you said, the wealth tax, this new policy on sort of agricultural concerns. Do you believe that policy can win people over, particularly in a general election? In a primary, when you've got a lot of Democratic candidates, I understand you're sort of differentiating yourself. And this is stuff you actually believe in. I'm not saying you don't. But do you think in a general election that policy is what people vote on? Can you win over certain voters with stuff like this?
So I believe, let me do this in 2 parts. I believe that in a primary, this is our chance to talk about policy and to be able to explain to each other and to the rest of the world, these are the things we think are important and worth fighting for. Understand, it's not policy in the abstract.
Right.
It's a statement of our values. When I say a millionaire's wealth tax, 2%, and that we could pay for universal childcare and universal pre-K for every one of our children. We could reduce the student loan debt burden. We could actually build more housing. We could attack racial redlining head on with that money. That's not just a statement about budgets. It's a statement about our values. I think if we keep those ideas in the debate right now, that makes us a stronger Democratic Party. It's why I said I could use help on this. Go to ElizabethWarren.com. It's not about, even at this point, who you're voting for in a year. It's about keeping these ideas. The Democrats should be the party of ideas. We should be the party that's driving the debate. And that's how we do it, with tangible ideas that will touch people's lives. You know, an example around this, that wealth tax is not only popular among Democrats and independents, a majority of Republicans support it. And then once you see how much money it produces,
it's a lot.
Go out and talk to families about what it would mean to have universal child care, high quality child care available for free for millions of families, what that would mean, and for low cost for other families, what it would mean to reduce the student loan debt burden. These are things that touch people's lives every day. And this is how the Democrats show, not tell, show that we really are out there on the side of working people, that we don't believe that government should just work for the rich and powerful. we believe it ought to work for all of us.
All right, Senator Elizabeth Warren, thank you so much for making some time tonight.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.